Jencks, Jensen, and the Heartthrobs. What's that mean? Arthur Jenson is the Jenson. Christopher Jencks is the Jencks. And the heartthrob authors are a group of, we've used the word before, muckrakers during the 60s-ish. The phrase is from a 1973 ASCD, American Association for Curriculum Development, publication by Wilma Longstreet. Gosh, the only Wilma I knew before her was the one married to Fred Flintstone. Longstreet sets I'm losing it, but don't worry, we're coming to an end. Longstreet sets up a bipolar myth, anti-myth. What is that? The myth is the schools can do everything. The anti-myth is no, they can't. Then she follows that to its logical conclusion. Therefore, since the schools can't do everything, they are not useful and should be done away with. Makes perfect sense, right? So all these guys are writing to this end, and Longstreet chronicles it for them. Arthur Jensen published an article called "How Much Can We Boost IQ and Scholastic Achievement?" He published that in the 1969 winter issue of the Harvard Review, which is a fairly well thought of publication. He focused on the school's apparent inability to raise intelligence. And when they asked him, "Hey, Art, what do you mean by that?" he said, "By intelligence, I mean that factor measured on intelligence tests." Well, duh. We just had a little bit on that a couple weeks ago, and we couldn't figure out what it was they were actually measuring. And intelligence can't be measured directly, but he says, I'm looking for the same thing that they find on intelligence tests. He concluded that genetic factors are more important than environmental ones. Remember, we talked about learning theories, whether conditions were inborn or whether they came from the environment. That's the argument we're getting back to now. Jenson says genetic factors are more important than environmental ones. Jenson also concluded, and this was the bombshell, that social class and racial variation in intelligence cannot be accounted for by environmental factors. It's inheritance. You're going to be smart, you inherit it. You're going to not be smart, you inherit it. Christopher Jencks wrote a book a little later than Jenson. His book was called Inequality. He wrote it in 1972. He also questioned the school's inability to, and he said, make a difference. When pushed into a corner, he said, what do I mean by make a difference? Raise a student's intelligence. And remember, that's what intelligence tests tell us. So here are these guys saying pretty much the same thing. The school can't make people any smarter than they are. Has nothing to do with Head Start. Remember, Head Start, we're getting them ready. So we're testing them now at the end and saying schools can't do much. Well, maybe schools can't do much anymore. Maybe all of that has been set. Maybe we need to worry about setting things better or remediating again, having adult Head Start, if you will. Them heartthrobers. They were 1970s to 60s muckrakers who, usually from experience, most of them taught for a year or two, most of them for a year. And then they went out and became millionaires. Muckrakers who portrayed all schools and teachers as villains and students as victims and became quite famous. Most of them also became quite wealthy. One is John Holt. John Holt's first book was called How Children Fail. The second was called How Children Learn. The third was called What Do I Do on Monday? Those three books are pretty valuable, and they say some good stuff. You need to read several of those. Then John Holt got nuts. I suspect he got quite wealthy at the point in time, began writing whatever came into his mind. His latest book, I believe, has to do with sexual liberation of children. Jonathan Kozol came here to the university and spoke while I was a faculty member. Jonathan taught 1 year in Boston, wrote a book, became very, 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 very famous, became a speaker at colleges and universities all across the nation. I believe his book was called The Way It's Supposed to Be. Belle Kaufman wrote Up the Down Staircase, which was made into a movie. She too taught 1 year. God bless Herbert Cole. Herbert wrote 39 children and then went back to teaching school. And as far as I know it, he is either retired from school teaching or is still doing that. Ivan Illich was a defrocked priest, did a lot of good things, but one of the bad things that he did was write a book called Deschooling Society, in which he called for the abolishment of schools. Again, going back to Longstreet's myth, anti-myth, since they don't do anything, let's get rid of them. And more. There are more heartthrobers, but we'll just confine ourselves to those three. More than three, sorry. Jencks Jensen, Jencks, and the Heartthrobs all contribute to the anti-myth. Schools can't do anything. So, why have them? Because, and these are the immeasurable fringes now, because education makes people more tolerant of cultural and class differences. The more educated you are, the more willing you are to accept others. Education imparts a longer time perspective that helps sustain initiative among middle and lower class recipients. It's not just a now, it's not just a give it to me now mentality that education produces. It's a, okay, if something is worth having, it's worth waiting for. It's worth working toward. Education helps develop that in middle and lower class kids. Education fosters and cultivates the ability to learn how to learn. Probably the most important thing there is. It's not what you learn, it's now you know how to find out. Even if it's only go to Google and look it up there. I now have a strategy to determine something. Education enhances opportunities for mobility. Clods like me can now have the opportunity to talk like people, to talk to people like you. I will never talk like people like you. I am genetically programmed to talk like this for the rest of my life. I'm taking pills for it, but there's nothing I can do about it. In the musicals, they always have a reprise. We're ready for it. Okay, here's our reprise. We're back to that table I showed you last week. I'm not going to say anything different about it than I said then. Simply point out the fact that enrollment in higher education has continued to increase, regardless of all the bad things that are said about it. Public schools, I would like to know what happened to the public schools, whether enrollment there has continued to increase and private schools has continued to decrease, or whether that has leveled off, or what has happened there since 1985. So if you can come across data showing that in any way, manner, or form, I would truly appreciate you sharing that with me. Let's pop on.